For the second time in several months, D.C. City Council Chairman and year-round Movember model Phil Mendelson proposed and ultimately failed at passing emergency legislation to rein in the D.C. gray area cannabis market. Mendelson's bill would have cracked down on the cannabis gifting businesses that have spread like wildfire throughout the city since Initiative 71 was codified as local law. As we've discussed in previous videos, D.C. has an incredibly dysfunctional legal-illegal cannabis market unlike any other state. This is due to the fact that D.C. is not a state, and Congress, a body in which the citizens of D.C. have no voting representation in, can veto local laws and exercise undemocratic, imperial-like rule over local DC residents. Taxation without representation indeed. In this video, I'll discuss what Chairman Mendelson tried to do with his latest failed proposed emergency legislation, where things currently stand in the cannabis distribution market, and where things will possibly or perhaps will likely go in the future. My name is Joseph Scrofano, and I'm the founder of Scrofano Law PC, a criminal defense firm that fights relentlessly on behalf of anyone in the DMV area who's in trouble and cares about the future. Okay, some quick background on the DC cannabis gray market. In 2014, DC voters overwhelmingly passed Initiative 71 that called for legalization of possession of marijuana. This was on the heels of the city's short-lived experiment on decriminalization. In 2015, the DC Council codified the I-71 into legislation and local law, and among other things, legalized possession and use of small quantities of marijuana, but continued to criminalize the sale of marijuana. Everyone thought DC would follow Colorado, California, and all the other states that have opened up adult-use recreational dispensaries. In comes Congressman Andy Harris, Republican of Ocean City, Maryland, who doesn't represent DC and thinks he knows best for the 700,000 citizens who overwhelmingly voted to abandon decades of failed marijuana criminalization and prohibition, and he inserts a rider into a congressional spending bill denying the locally elected city government officials from passing laws to license and regulate the now exploding cannabis market in the district. That's right, a single congressman in a body we have no voting representation in overrules both the voters in DC and their locally elected representatives. Now, fast forward, Democrats take back the House, and everyone thinks that the rider will be removed. Not so fast. The Republicans still control the Senate, who in that year insist on the rider in a budget bill and a series of budget deals where the Democrats cave, and DC still can't issue licenses for adult use recreational dispensaries. In 2020, Joe Biden wins the election for presidency, and voters in Georgia pull off a miracle, electing both Jon Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock to the Senate in a special election runoff. And for 2021, Democrats now have control of the House, the Senate, and the presidency for the first time since 2014. Surely the rider will finally go this year. So everyone thought. Once again, the Democrats, now controlling both the executive and legislative branch, caved to Republican pressure to keep the rider without a fight, and basically gave a slap in the face to DC residents who are the most reliably Democratic voters in the country. In the meantime, the DC cannabis gray market has exploded, which is not at all surprising, given that the city council legalized a highly desirable, previously illegal product, yet provided no legal mechanism to distribute the product. Instead, budding entrepreneurs seized on a loophole in the legislation that permitted gifting marijuana. Overnight, businesses bloomed, selling products like stickers, t-shirts, digital art, physical art, even motivational speeches. And they would gift cannabis or do gift cannabis in connection with these sales. In 2020, the pandemic hit, and for whatever reason, unknown to me, the Metropolitan Police Department basically stopped enforcing cannabis distribution laws. Delivery services and even brick and mortar shops are continuing to operate with a few raids here and there. One unintended consequence of congressional interference, lax MPD enforcement, and an exponential growth of these gifting operations has been a tremendous decrease in revenue for DC's locally legal medicinal dispensaries. These dispensaries are tightly regulated and forced to follow tons of rules and regulations that the gray market businesses don't have to follow and are not subject to. I mean, it makes sense. Why go through the hassle of getting a DC medical marijuana card, pay the fees, find a doctor, get a recommendation, when you can literally find a delivery service or local brick and mortar with a simple Google search? In comes Chairman Mustache Mendelson, whose ear the medicinal dispensaries clearly have, to propose emergency legislation to crack down on the gray area businesses. And again, this is his second failed effort. He tried earlier in November and lost after a last-minute successful lobbying by the gray area businesses that prevented him from passing emergency legislation that would have imposed steep civil penalties against businesses operating without a medicinal license. The bill included fines of up to $30,000 for these businesses and up to $60,000 to landlords who allow brick and mortar gray area dispensaries to operate in their properties. Fortunately, the bill needed a supermajority of council members for it to pass as emergency legislation, which it did not get. So, where do things stand today? Pretty much the same as they were before last Tuesday's vote. Congress is still undemocratically and paternalistically interfering with the local affairs of the District of Columbia. Medicinal dispensaries are still hamstrung by unfair regulations, and gray area businesses are continuing to operate with intermittent police enforcement. To his credit, Mendelson's bill would have expanded the medical marijuana program to allow residents to self-certify that they have a condition, which would drastically expand access to locally lawful medicinal dispensaries and cut through some of the current bureaucratic red tape to get a medicinal card. However, this bill did not include expanding the number of available medical licenses, which both cannabis advocates favor and other council members like Kenyon McDuffie proposed at Tuesday's emergency session. Where will things go? At this point, it's impossible to tell, given that just about everyone from the mayor to the council, as well as other stakeholders, and some criminal defense lawyers, like yours truly, thought that this would be the year that the rider finally goes. One possible direction is that they could pass a civil enforcement bill that would call for fines and other penalties for unlicensed businesses, but would also include Mendelson's self-certified rule, along with a large increase in medicinal and medical dispensary licenses to help gifting businesses transition from gray area gifting to locally legal medicinal dispensaries. Now, that would be a much-deserved giant middle finger to congressional Republican tyrants and their Democratic Party enablers. Meanwhile, if you or someone you know finds yourself on the unlucky side of one of MPD's sporadic enforcement raids of marijuana dispensaries, contact us today for a consultation. Or if you're a local cannapreneur who just wants to know or have a greater understanding of what risks you are taking operating in this market, contact us as well. Finally, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button for continued content on all things criminal law in the DMV.